Welcome to Convocation today. I am really excited to be able to introduce our speaker for today. Last semester, I was chatting with my colleague, Amy Jorgensen, who is right here, and she is the department chair of our visual arts program here at Snow College. And I asked her if she could recommend someone for our Convocation series this spring. And when she told me about our guest today, I was interested. Jorge Rojas is a multidisciplinary artist, performer, curator, and educator whose works have been exhibited or are part of permanent collections throughout North America. In New York City, New Jersey, Houston, Miami, California, Utah, Guadalajara, and Montreal. He has received many grants, fellowships, and awards, including a Utah's Most Influential Artist Award in 2019, the Salt Lake City Mayor's Artist Award in 2022, and he was selected at 2022 as well. He studied art at the University of Utah and at Bellas Artes in San Miguel de Allende, Mexico. From 2015 to 2021, he served as Director of Learning and Engagement at Utah Museum of Fine Arts, where he oversaw education, community engagement, and programming initiatives for the museum. Mr. Rojas is actively involved in the Salt Lake City community as an artist, educator, curator, and is a passionate advocate for advancing racial and cultural justice through the arts. A final note, yesterday I was talking with my dean about Convocation, and when I pointed out who our guest for today was, he replied, "He's a big deal." Please welcome Jorge Rojas.
Oh, sorry, you made me laugh. Thank you, Cheryl. Hi, everyone. How are you all doing today? Great. By show of hands, who here is an artist or interested in art? Okay. Who's interested here in education? How about social justice? How about community work? All right. You're my number one audience member. Thank you. Before I get started, I want to thank Cheryl Bodrero. She's been super pro and kind and inviting me and in helping me get ready for this talk, as well as the tech crew up there. Thank you. And I also want to thank my dear friend and colleague, Amy Jorgensen. Amy's been a friend for many, many years and has been a great supporter of my work. In fact, I recently had a mid-career retrospective at Granary Arts. And I'm so grateful to Amy for all that she does for this community and for the Utah community. So I was asked to do a talk about art and social justice, which is one of my favorite topics. And it's difficult for me to talk about art or social justice without talking about community. To me, there is no real social change without communities. And so what I have planned for you today is I'm going to kind of walk you through some older projects that are going to kind of set up how I've started thinking about community building and about bringing people together in groups. I'm going to just jump right in. Whoops. That's not what I want. Let's try this. That didn't work. There we go. I gratefully acknowledge that I live, work, create, and learn on this land, which is named for the Ute tribe and is the unceded traditional and ancestral homeland of the Shoshone, Paiute, Goshute, and Ute peoples. I acknowledge the significance of place and the continued existence and contributions of indigenous people who have lived and cared for this land for thousands of years. I commit to partnering with and learning from Native nations and urban Indian communities through research, education, collaboration, and community building activities. So when I got invited to this series called Convocation, I was like, Convocation? That sounds a lot like commencement. I got really nervous and I thought I was going to have to give some kind of inspiring talk. But this is not commencement, it's convocation. So I looked it up, and convocation is a large assembly of people, the action of calling people together for a large formal assembly. And I was like, I can talk about that, because actually my work is in many ways about bringing people together around an idea, around a cause, or just to share space together. I'm going to start talking about a project that I started many years ago called Life Gestures, which is participatory performance art. Back in 2008, I did a series. I was living in New York City at the time, and I did a series called MySpace. I think most of the people in this room are a little too young to remember MySpace, but MySpace was one of the first social media platforms, and it was really based on music, and it was a way for people all over the world to connect with each other around music. I used it, I was playing with words, and I thought it'd be interesting to think about public spaces, and specifically art spaces, as MySpace. So what I would do is I would get invited to different venues, galleries, museums, public places, and I would ask them if I could do a MySpace project there, and they would say yes. What does that entail? And I would say, well, I'd like you to give me a space that I can do whatever I want in. And they would say, well, like, what are you talking about? And I said, well, I'd specifically like to turn this into a community space. So they'd kind of look at me and they'd say, well, you know, this is a community space. And I said, well, great, I'd just like to turn it into the kind of community space that I'm thinking about. So they said, okay. So the first place I went to, I ended up doing this series in Brooklyn and in Miami and in the Bronx and in different parts of the world. But the first one I did was in Guadalajara, Mexico, in a place called Ex Convento del Carmen, which is an old convent that's been turned into a museum place. So when I went down there, they said, let us give you a tour, and they gave me a tour of all the galleries, and they said, you know, you can choose which gallery you'd like to exhibit it. And I said, you know, there's this like storefront window out by the street that faces the street. I said, is that space available? They said, no, that's just a space where we hang an artwork that's meant to draw people into the museum. It's indicative of what we're showing inside. And I said, well, I'd really like to do my performance there. They just, again, looked at me a little bit dumbfounded, and they said, all right, what are you thinking? And I said, well, I'd like to live there for a week, and I'd like to engage with the public as they go out. This is in Guadalajara City, which is the second largest city in Mexico, and on a very transited street. So they said, you know, we don't really have a bathroom there, and I said, that's okay, you know, I can, if I need to use the restroom, I'll use the restroom in the museum, but I would like to be here 24/7 for 7 days, for a week. And so anyway, finally, they said that would be okay. This is me in my storefront window in Ex Convento del Carmen. I'm on my computer. This is after the first couple of days. And so I was really just kind of interested in kind of reimagining public spaces, museums, galleries, and really thinking about how these museums can be a little bit more welcoming and inclusive. I was also very interested in live streaming, so I was live streaming this 24/7 and engaging with people all over the world while I was living in this storefront window. I should start by saying that I grew up in a was really kind of privileged environment where I'm from Mexico. My mom, who raised 5 kids, they really thought it was important for us to grow up in the arts. So all of my siblings and I are some kind of artist, musicians, performers, dancers. And so I grew up going to museums and going to cultural activities and going to arts activities. And then as I was growing up, I realized that not everybody had that privilege and not everybody had that experience. And I also started learning that the venues themselves weren't always really welcoming and inviting. There's the inside of the storefront window. As you can see, there's a little cot there, a little desk, and that's where I lived for a week. I was really interested in just interacting with people, and literally I was just waving people through the street, through the window that you can see there, and inviting them to come in. Over the time that I was there over the week, I learned a couple of things. The main thing I learned is in talking to people, I said I just had a chance to just talk to people and make art together, basically. So I would always ask people as they would come in, I'd say, hey, have you ever been in this museum? And I was kind of surprised that a great deal of the people that came in had said no, never been in here. And my next question would always be, why not? And they said, well, they had a number of questions, but it usually was one of these answers. It was one of these three. One of them was like, never really felt invited, never really felt like there's anything here for me, and this is more for like artsy people, like wealthy people and stuff. And those were the three main answers that I got, and I realized that, these institutions aren't always as inclusive as they could be, and that kind of started shaping the rest of my practice until today. As you can see in these pictures, I didn't have any problem filling them up with people. In fact, I spent most of my time preparing materials and making sure that everybody had something to make art with. Teachers would come in and say, I run an orphanage. Can I bring my kids in to make art with you? Absolutely. Or other teachers that would come in, or families that would say, can I bring in my grandma, or can I bring in? So it basically, for 7 days, we had chock full in this little space of people waiting in line to come in and make art. As you can see here, even at nighttime, people would come by and hang out with me through the window after the museum was closed. And then the slide on the right shows that after I left, the artwork that the community made is what stayed in the storefront window. So it was my way to kind of subvert the system of entering and showing your work in a museum by creating a space where I invited the community to make the art that would end up in the museum for the run of the exhibition. Now I'm going to shift forward to a couple years later to one of my favorite projects, which also was shaped my practice. It's called Gente de Maíz, People of Corn, and it took place the first one was at Project Row Houses in Houston. This is a series of projects that I'm continuing to do. I haven't stopped working with corn as a material, but also as a substance that connects me to my roots from Mexico. And corn, maíz, is something that is present and important all throughout the Americas, including with our native peoples here in the United States. But this one was the first time I worked on this. At the time I was doing a performance called the Tortilla Oracle, where I read tortillas, like someone might read your tarot cards or your tea leaves. And there was this exhibition happening at Project Row Houses about food and different aspects around food. So they said, Jorge, we want you to come and do your performance, read tortillas. And I was like, no problem, I'm there. And they said, here's the trick, though. It's like, this is actually part of a residency, and we need you to develop a project that's going to involve the community. And I said, okay, tell me a little bit more about it. And they said, well, we have an after-school program where we have single mothers come with their kids to make some kind of art activity and create community and build dialogue. It's a way to kind of keep the kids out of trouble and keeping their hands busy. So I came up with this idea called Gente de Maíz, and these are some of my collaborators. Basically, the idea I came up with is inspired by the Popol Vuh. The Popol Vuh is also known as the Mayan Bible, or contains the sacred teachings of the Maya people. And in that book, in the Popol Vuh, they talk about how the first human prototypes were created from corn, from the maíz. The story says that the gods or the deities, they tried to make the first humans. First they tried to make them out of gold, but they were too heavy. Then they tried to make them out of wood, but they were too susceptible to fire. They're trying to make them out of earth and clay, but they were too fragile. And eventually they looked all around them and they saw maíz, they saw corn everywhere, and they decided that they were going to take some corn, a little bit of their own blood, chop it up together and make masa, the kind of masa that you use to make tamales or tortillas or whatever you use corn flour for. And I thought, oh, well, this will be fun because we can mix up a lot of masa and get it to be kind of like Play-Doh, and we can invite kids and families to make little corn people, playing with the idea of people of the corn, gente de maíz, but also to talk about food, to talk about the meaning of food in our cultures, in our heritage, in our traditions, and how there's philosophical thought around food. In corn, certainly we talk about corn as a symbol of community. Corn is a symbol of bringing people together, and it shows up in a lot of our food. I think about 70% of the food that we have at the grocery store. But anyway, so I invited these folks. When you see here, they have a bowl full of masa. Here's some more of my collaborators, and we really just started asking people to make little figures out of corn. You can see in the back, you can see they're kind of stacking up. And then there's kind of a mandala shape in the middle. That's also a project that I've been developing since then, where I make mandalas out of natural corn grains. So they have a beautiful palette. Actually, there's red and blues and yellows and black and yeah. So the corn mandalas represents for me the source of life, where all life stems from and infinitely returns to, and the little corn figures represent all of us and where we, as we come from the earth. You can see here they're starting to build up. And we got kind of quite a factory going there, making little corn people. And that's an image of the installation when it was finished. Hundreds and hundreds of little corn people. Another shot. There's a little close-up of it because part of the project is because there's dough. It can't stay wet, so we would take them out into the sun, which there's plenty of in Houston, and we would sun bake them. So they would get a little crusty, which also kind of gave them some texture and some more interest. And then you can see there at the opening, people starting to come in and see it. I continued playing with this idea of corn mandalas, and this is one that I did recently at the Utah Museum of Contemporary Art, where I'm actually utilizing sacred geometry designs, universal designs, to create this corn mandala. And then this is also a project, another mandala I did with the Corn People Project again in Park City at the Kimball Arts Center. You can see here that I've expanded beyond thinking about Mesoamerica and really have started introducing symbols like Native American symbols, Mayan, Aztec, even Inca symbols from Peru. Okay, now I'm going to talk a little bit about performance art. All of those are actually related to performance art in the sense that they're performative, they're bringing people together. It's more of a social practice in thinking about creating a space where people feel safe to create and to have a dialogue together around a theme. Now, performance art. Who here knows what performance art is? 1, 2. Okay, well, you're going to learn something today. So performance art is different than the performing arts, right? The performing arts are, we have dance, theater, symphony, orchestra, the opera. What brings them all kind of together is they're usually on a stage. They're often rehearsed. They normally have a clear beginning, middle, and end. And people often buy tickets to go see it. The performance art is different. Oftentimes it's not rehearsed. Oftentimes it's not staged. Oftentimes people don't buy tickets to it. But the main elements in performance art are time, space, the performer's body, and a relationship between audience and performer. I've heard people describe performance art as the illegitimate child of the visual arts and the performing arts, because it's not one necessarily and it's not the other, it's just somewhere in between. And it can be a little strange. It's often performance artists, we often create performances that are meant to provoke thought, sometimes to provoke discomfort. And so as I share with you some of the documentation of some of my performances, I encourage you to kind of check with yourself and ask yourself, what are you feeling? And if you feel uncomfortable, I want you to ask yourself, why do I feel uncomfortable? And what is it about what I'm watching that's making me feel uncomfortable? And that's kind of what performance does and asks of the viewer. It asks you to go a little bit further than just looking at a work of art and then walking on to the next one. It kind of stays with you, I hope. I'm really getting now into work around social justice. This is work that have felt a responsibility to make. Before I was making, like I said, I was making corn people and reading tortillas and doing a number of other performances that were not necessarily dealing with political issues or social issues. But during the Trump administration, I started seeing a lot of injustices that were affecting me as an immigrant, as an artist, as a member of society, and I really wanted to respond to that work. I'm going to show you, again, some video documentation of these performances. Some of these performances are durational, so they can last for hours. Some of them are shorter, like a half an hour, and some of them were repeated in numerous days. So I've got these nice little edited pieces for you that are hopefully more digestible. The first piece I'm going to show you is called Hands Up, Don't Shoot. It's a participatory performance that deals with racial profiling and police brutality. It was performed on September 30th, 2016, so 6 years ago, at the main library in Salt Lake City as part of the Performance Art Festival. The duration of the actual performance was 30 minutes. It was people showed up, they did the performance, and they left. So as you can see, I'm using performance to, again, bring people together around an idea. The goal of the performance was to create a space where participants and observers could come together in gestures of protest, solidarity, empowerment, mourning, remembrance, and healing. Unfortunately, this performance is still extremely relevant today. And there's going to be time after the presentation for questions. So if you have any questions, please write them down or keep them in your mind, because I'd love to have a conversation with you about the work afterwards. The next piece I'm going to show you, again, is a documentation. This performance is called Tether. It's a participatory performance, again, that attempts to embody experiences of trauma for undocumented immigrants, refugees, asylum seekers, in 3 different stages of the migration process: before, during, and after immigration. It was performed on October 5th and 6th, 2018 at the Salt Lake City Main Public Library. Each performance lasted approximately 30 minutes. Again, so, you know, it's really hard to recapture what happens in a live performance of any type, but it's ephemeral. You know, it happens once and then it's done. So as artists, it's really important for us to have some kind of document. So, you know, I usually hire a crew of people to photograph, to videotape, and then I will work with an editor to edit some kind of piece. In this days, with this kind of short attention span that we all have, you know, I try to make them so that you can try to capture a sense of what happened. But it's impossible to do that, but hopefully this gets us close. turns out it's really difficult to write with French fries, but some of the words that were written there were words like rapist, illegal, a lot of words that were the way that President Trump at the time was describing people like myself, immigrants coming into this country. I'm going to keep moving forward. Again, I hope that some of you can stick around after the presentation to have a Q&A and have a dialogue. The next piece is called Cage. It was created. It's another one that deals with issues that resonate deeply with me and that feel really close to home. It was created in response to the inhumane conditions that migrant families and children are and were being subjected to in the U.S.-Mexico border. Cage draws attention to children that were being held indefinitely at detention centers across the U.S. In this action or performance, a space is created for the public to stand in for the silenced victims. It was performed on October 4th, 2019 at the Salt Lake City Public Library. These folks wearing the very ornate and kind of beautiful clothing, they're called chinelos. Chinelos are traditional Mexican dancers who, for over 200 years, actually have been mocking Spanish colonizers at festivities like Carnival by dressing up like them with their fine clothing, wearing masks with beards and fair skin. Normally, chinelos are very lively. They're fun, they dance, they're kind of goofy and playful, but they took a different tone for this performance. This piece, in editing it, I decided to also include some original news footage, which, of course, I was not including the video of it during the performance, but the audio was playing during the performance. Can I get a little more volume, please?
Imagine being ripped away from your mother or father and not knowing if you're ever going to see them again, and then being placed in a detention facility with strangers. Imagine the horror and fear you will see doing that. What must that sound like?
The gentleman will suspend.
For what reason, Madam Speaker?
The gentleman is in breach of quorum.
Cite the rule, Madam Speaker.
Rule 17 of the House.
I am Congressman Ted Lieu from California. If the Statue of Liberty could cry, she would be crying today. As I stand here, there are 2,300 babies and kids who were ripped away from their parents by our government and are in detention facilities across America. America was a country founded by people fleeing persecution. We were a land of immigrants. President Ronald Reagan called us that shining city upon the hill. Unfortunately, Donald Trump and Homeland Security Secretary Nielsen have perverted that grand legacy and have now engaged in a functional equivalent of kidnapping. You can believe in any God or no God at all and conclude that ripping kids away from their parents is immoral. I believe in Jesus Christ. Every single thing in the Gospels and what Christ taught goes against the policy of family separation. Imagine being a mother and father and losing your child to the government and not knowing if you're ever going to see your child again. The horror of that. Imagine being a child. When you were young, your parents were likely the most important people in your life. Imagine being ripped away from your mother or father and not knowing if you're ever going to see them again. And then being placed in a detention facility with strangers. Imagine the horror and fear you will see doing that.
The gentleman will
Why
suspend.
are you trying to prevent the American people
Rule
from listening to what it
17
sounds
of
like
the
in a
House
detention
prohibits
facility?
the use
These are
of that
babies
device.
and kids in a detention facility. Why do you not let the American people hear what they are saying? Why are we
The
hiding
Rule
this from the American people?
17 prohibits the use of an electronic device to make sounds in the chamber. The gentleman
Why are we hiding it from the American people?
will suspend.
Why are we hiding it from the
The
American people?
gentleman will suspend. Per Rule 17 of the House.
We have 2,300 babies and kids.
The gentleman will suspend, per Rule 17 of the House, that prohibits the use of a device to make sounds in the chamber.
We have 2,300 babies and kids in detention facilities who were ripped away from their parents. I think the American people need to hear this.
Will the gentleman suspend, per Rule 17 of the House?
I think the
The
American
sergeant-
people need to hear this ProPublica tape of a detention facility of babies and children who were ripped away from their parents.
The sergeant in arms will enforce the rules of decorum.
I yield back.
The gentleman yields back.
After the Chinellos left the stage, we thought the performance would end and people would just go home. But something really interesting happened. The folks that were in the blankets, that were standing in for the caged children and families, they just stayed there. The organizer of the festival came downstairs and said, "Jorge, they're not leaving. Can you come up and so that they know it's over?" And I said, "No." I said, "My part is over. They're doing their part." After talking with folks, they expressed that when I asked them, I said, "What made you stay?" They said, "Well, we just wanted to stay and feel what it felt like to stay here. It felt like a form of solidarity. Felt like it was a moment of meditation and a time to just sit in silence." So that's another thing that happens with performance art, is that you can't script it. You don't really know what's going to happen, but every once in a while something really powerful like that happens. Okay, coming to an end here. This is one of my favorite quotes that I'd like to share with you, and I often close my presentations with. It's by Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. It reads, "If you want to be a true professional, you will do something outside of yourself, something to repair tears in your community, something to make life a little better for people less fortunate than you. That's what I think a meaningful life is, living not for oneself, but for one's community." I have a few upcoming projects. There's a performance video that I was going to show today, but I ran out of time. We'll be screening at the Utah Museum of Contemporary Art as part of the Nori Screen Dance Festival, coming up on February 24th and 25th. I'll be offering the keynote for the Utah Art Education Association in Moab, Utah. I'm one of 10 artists in a really cool project called the Boombox Benefit Group Show, where 10 artists have been given a boombox to embellish in our own ways and style. I'll be doing a new performance at the Salt Lake City Performance Art Festival in the Public Library on April 14th and 15th. And I've been working with the Utah Valley University Museum, who was launching a brand new museum. I've been working with them for over a year and a half for a new project called The Art of Belonging. And that concludes my talk. So I think we have still a few minutes. I know some folks have to leave at 1:20, I believe, for classes, but if you want to stay, I'll stay here as long as you want me to answer any questions. Does anybody have any comments, any questions? Yes, in the front. And I'll repeat your question so people can hear. Oh, you have a microphone. Yeah. This is such a beautiful venue, by the way. Thank you, Eccles family.
So, in a lot of your performance art, there are often children viewing, and these are very intense concepts that are struggles for a lot of adults to even be able to process. What do you find children's responses to typically elicit?
Great question. So, like, for instance, with the tether piece, what I did is before I entered the performance, we just set out some chairs. So I don't think people really knew what they were getting into when they sat in those chairs, and then they realized that they were in the performance and they were participating. And as you could see on the video, some of them, in some of the performances, it was children. You know, I don't think any of the topics that I'm dealing with there are beyond children, or anything that they can't absorb or somehow interpret in their own way. Children are incredibly empathetic. They're also very smart, and they can interpret. I have two children of my own. I have a 10-year-old and a 12-year-old, and they have been in many of my performances. So I try to make performances that some are not meant for the public, some are more for adult audiences, but all the ones that you saw there can be family friendly, if you will. But the response has been really interesting. Like with the tether piece, you know, I'm giving them a rope that is connected to me. The tether can represent many things, right? It can be a good thing, it can be a bad thing, it can be a limiting thing. It can represent a connection to my country, to my roots, but it can also be something that controls me, right? I was actually really grateful on the day that it was children, because they were so careful not to hurt me or to make sure that they weren't like tugging on me the wrong way or something. You know, adults can be a little bit more less thoughtful sometimes, and so. You know, there have been times I performed that where people are like pulling back on it. They want to see what happens when they pull back on that rope. So I guess to answer your question, I would just say don't underestimate children. You don't want to do anything in front of them that's offensive, but I'm always grateful to hear kids come up to me and saying, hey, that was really weird, or thank you for doing that, or that made me think a lot about a lot of things. So I hope that answers your question. But yeah, children are smart, and they absorb a lot of information, and I like when they participate in my performances. Thanks for your question. Other questions?